not expect to be crying already. I'm so honored to be here to be able to share my story with you today. When Aubrey asked me to share it with you, the first thing I thought was, how do I share a decade-long story with you in 45 minutes? And how do I make it so that you can apply it to your life too? I spent some time praying about it, and it hit me at the most random times. We're going to play a game of Chutes and Ladders. If you want to pull out your phone and quickly Google an image of Chutes and Ladders game board, the red and yellow one from when I was a kid is the best. But I'd love for you to have a refreshed visual of what that game board looks like. My life, the last few years, has felt like a giant game of Chutes and Ladders. I felt like I've been rolling the dice and hitting every spot that has a chute. It has felt like a lot of empty steps without upward or downward movement. And as I've been looking back, I've seen so many spots where I needed to climb the ladder out of darkness. I didn't just escape the darkness, I climbed the rungs of these ladders out of it. You're about to hear my Chutes and Ladders story, but I'd love for you to think of what the chutes in your life are. And as you listen to mine, I hope that you'll find tools that you can use to add rungs to your life. So we're going to start my story out on a ladder. I married my husband Derek, he's over here, in September of 2012. He was serving in the Air Force as an air traffic controller, and he was stationed at Edwards Air Force Base in California, which is very remote. 45 minutes from the grocery store. It was in the middle of Barstow and Bakersfield. Okay, sorry. Well, that is much louder. And so it's in the middle of nowhere. When we got married, I had 2 semesters left of my degree in psychology, and I graduated in May of 2013. We knew we wanted a big family, and we wanted kids close together. So we started trying to grow our family as soon as I graduated, and we were so excited, which leads me to our first shoot. I didn't know much about infertility. I never knew anyone that had dealt with it, or at least they hadn't talked about it. We fully expected to see a positive pregnancy test that first month, but we didn't, and then we didn't, and then we didn't, and then we still didn't. 12 months of not seeing a positive on a pregnancy test. We had some testing done, and after finding a pretty easy fix, we found out we were pregnant in month 13. We were so excited, and we began to tell our family and friends right away. We saw a heartbeat at 8 weeks, which was magic, and we were giddy. And they say once you see a heartbeat, that all is well. But 2 weeks after we saw that sweet heartbeat, I began to pass massive clots. We rushed to the ER and found out that I had a subchorionic hemorrhage, and baby had a 50-50 chance that they would make it. I was sent home on bed rest orders, which didn't last long because I miscarried our sweet baby a few hours after we got home. And I was crushed, just crushed, and angry. We had tried for so long, and God just took it away, just took it from me. And we were so confused. In the spaces, like on our big board, in the space between this miscarriage and my ladder to climb out of it, I slept on an air mattress in my living room for a solid month. Every morning that I would wake up in my normal bed and I didn't have to run to the bathroom to throw up was like a reminder that I wasn't pregnant anymore, and it was hard on me. So I moved to the living room, and since we lived in the middle of nowhere and I didn't have a job, I binge watched all the seasons of Grey's Anatomy that were current up to that point. On said mattress with my blinds closed. Like, I binged them like all day, like that. It was not healthy. And I'm not totally sure what finally got me off that air mattress. Maybe I finished all the seasons, but I finally came out of my cave. I began to do what I could, which was research why my cycles weren't regular and why it had taken so long for us to get pregnant. 4 months had gone by since my miscarriage, and I still hadn't had a cycle. So I finally came across Clomid in my search and really felt like that was what I needed. I made the appointment, I advocated for myself, and I left that appointment with a prescription. Honestly, the biggest rung on this ladder was getting pregnant with our sweet Ellie. She gave me hope and she gave me purpose. We named her Eleanor, which means light. She was and still is exactly that for me. In the spaces here, I really enjoyed Ellie. We wanted kids closer together. We began trying again with an 18-month age gap intention. The top of this chute looks like 7 months of negative tests. Finally, again with COVID, we were able to get pregnant. At 7 weeks, I started spotting and subsequently panicking. We got in for an ultrasound, and all we could see on the screen was a sac. No heartbeat, no baby. The sac had grown, but a baby hadn't, which is called a blighted ovum. Looking back, this miscarriage was the easiest on my heart, but we were still so sad. It was about this time that I started looking into pursuing a dream I'd had, which was graphic design school. We found an online program through a university, and in hindsight, this is the most incredible blessing. It kept me busy, it kept me distracted, and it kept me going through some really tough things that were ahead. I started school, I did another round of COVID, and we were pregnant. This pregnancy made me so sick. We pulled out the air mattress again, but this time it was so I could sleep in between opening fruit snacks and turning on Trolls or Mona. It knocked me flat for 16 to 18 weeks. Towards the end of my 19th week of pregnancy, we traveled a few hours to spend a week in Disneyland with my side of our family. We were so excited to take Ellie to Disneyland. I was not even bummed in the slightest that I couldn't ride anything. I loved every minute of chasing princesses and eating all the treats. So we did a few days at Disneyland, and we had a beach day planned for the Monday morning of our trip. That Monday morning, September 18th, 2017, I woke up in quite a bit of pain. I'd had kidney stones in my pregnancy with Ellie, and I assumed it was another one. When I went to the bathroom, the question of, did my water just work, left my mind as soon as it entered it. I was 20 weeks, there was no way. I assumed the kidney stone had moved or something like that. So I went back to bed in pain, but crawled out right as we were leaving for the beach. The drive seemed way longer than it should have been, and I was in so much pain I couldn't sit still. I was constantly pushing up on like the armrest in the car on my elbows to relieve pressure. We finally made it to the beach. I quickly ran to the restroom before making the trek through the sand, and was shocked to find out that I was bleeding a lot. I rushed back to Derek. I called my OBGYN, who told me to rush into labor and delivery. The OB was located halfway between where we lived and where we were, which was an hour-and-a-half direction or drive in both directions. So the OB wanted us to make it to him, so we left Ellie with my family, and we started the 1.5-hour drive to the hospital in Santa Clarita, in California. 30 minutes into our drive, I realized that my pain was lasting 30 to 45 seconds and was coming every 30 minutes. I was in labor. I began to panic and naively started planning for a long NICU stay. We made it to the hospital. We horribly parked in the roundabout. I don't think anybody else could use that hospital roundabout while we were parked in it. Derek ran in for a wheelchair, and I couldn't walk. I couldn't get myself out of the car. I was in so much pain. He and a nurse helped me into it and rushed me into the elevator. The nurse desk was really calm, and it was really frustrating. They didn't really believe that I was in labor when I gave them my due date. But chaos broke loose when I stood up out of my wheelchair to get into my gown, and I lost the rest of my water. And nurses began to yell and rush to get everything out. Sorry, my card's I delivered our sweet baby Jet less than 1 minute later at 20 weeks and 1 day. We held our sweetest little guy as long as my heart could handle, and then I went numb. I had no words. It was like watching everything happen rather than it happening to me. They ran some tests, gathered up a few things for us, and as soon as I was cleared, I left the hospital in a wheelchair, holding a cream box with a green ribbon and no baby. to my family who had just had a great day at the beach. They spent the evening snuggling Ellie and bursting into tears at random times. We were told at the hospital that because of how far along I was, we'd need to bury our baby. Picking out his plot, his casket, his flowers, and his headstone was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. I remember going to Cheesecake Factory right after. So we lost him on September 18th. Our anniversary is September 21st, and several days later we decided to go to Cheesecake Factory to kind of try to celebrate our anniversary late. And I remember wondering why people weren't like coming up to me and hugging me or like getting up out of their seat and giving me their seat. Like, wasn't I just lost my baby stamped on my forehead? Because it sure felt like it was. The spaces after losing Jet were heartbreaking ones. I remember begging God to give me my baby back. Nothing else mattered, I just wanted my baby back. I spent a lot of time wondering what I had done wrong, or if I had somehow wished him away because I had wanted Ellie to have a sister close in age and not a brother. And it was a heavy weight. It was a heavy weight to carry. But luckily, my ladder to climb out was heavily assisted by my Father in heaven. The rungs on this ladder were looking for God's hand in this situation and finding it everywhere. I looked for the blessings, and I found so many. The first place that I found God's hands was in the people and circumstances surrounding this loss. We were on a family vacation, and it's tempting to be upset that my family vacation was ruined, but I didn't go there. I realized what an incredible blessing it was that my mom, who Ellie trusted almost as much as she trusted Derek and I, was right there, and I didn't have to send her somewhere with a stranger for several hours. We came right home to a family that was ready to love on us. We got to go to the good hospital rather than our local one that was closer to where we lived. Had I gone there, I would have delivered our baby in triage in between curtains. Whereas at this other hospital, I got to deliver in a room, a private room. It was just so much better. So like finding those blessings was game-changing for me. This loss was hard, but God created the best circumstances for this to happen in. This realization helped me so much to not be angry and to realize God had a plan for this. As I was grieving this loss, I was reminded of a cool experience with Jet's announcement pictures. I hesitated to get them done, but I found a photographer that was building her portfolio, which usually means the pictures are cheap or free. We were just about to separate from the military, and we didn't have another job lined up, and so we were being very frugal. And so the night before, I asked her how much we could pay her, and she said $95, and I panicked. Like, I really panicked. We just didn't have that money. But I had taken a course. I knew why she needed to charge that. I knew it was really, truly cheap, but we just didn't have the money. I agonized over it for hours, just agonized. But finally I remembered that I could pray. And only a few words into the prayer, and I felt immediate peace. And the thought, get the pictures done, the money will work out, came to my head. So we moved forward, and I was still unsure about how it would work out. But that next morning, the lady I had babysat for the previous summer asked me if I could babysit for 8 hours the next week. Last summer, she had paid $11 per hour, times 8 is $88, and I could totally cover the rest of the $7. So I watched them, and she asked me, or she came home, and she asked me how much she had paid me the last summer. I told her $11. She wrote a check and folded it up and went back, or I went home. I opened it home. Sorry, my words are disappearing. I opened it at home and began to sob. The little rectangle said $95, the exact amount of the photographer. After we lost Jet, these pictures meant so much to me. They were really all I had left of him. God prepared comfort for me weeks before my loss. And noticing this completely shifted my perspective. although I'm still unsure why, I know that I'm walking through it with, I know who I'm walking through it with, and that makes all the difference. And this is how I climbed that ladder from darkness to being okay. In the spaces after this ladder, we submitted paperwork to ask the military to move us closer to our family while we grieved and closer to Jet's grave. Our request was quickly approved, and we moved to Hill Air Force Base here in Utah. After 2 rounds of Clomid, we were able to get pregnant with our sweet Brixton. This next shoot was one that I fully did not anticipate. Pregnancy after a stillbirth might be just as hard as the loss itself. It rocked me. I was pregnant again before Jet's due date, which was a race I had inflicted upon myself, and I started spotting on Jet's due date, which sent me spiraling down faster than anything else. I had never really understood depression before this. I had assumed it was just that people were sad and didn't have anything happy to bring them out of it. And I quickly learned that is not what depression is. I wanted this baby so badly, yet I did not want to get out of bed. I didn't want to turn on the light. I had no motivation to get back into graphic design school after my bereavement hiatus, and it was dark. It was really dark. The first step on the ladder I used to climb out of this darkness wasn't actually made by me. My mom could tell that I was not doing well and suggested that I see a therapist, and she helped me find one. And this turned out to be extremely helpful. The therapist walked me through my depression and asked me to think about when I first noticed it. When I first noticed the fog, the lack of motivation, the desire to stay in bed. I traced it back to the day that I started spotting, and I told her about the massive history essay I had to around that same time, and I had been potty training Ellie in the gloomy month of February. We were house hunting and getting outbid on every house, and I was sick. I was so sick. When I named all of these things, the therapist looked at me and said, "Well, no wonder you're depressed. That's a lot." And I'll never forget it. Her validating me in it and giving me permission to not feel guilty about it allowed me to realize that there were things that got me there. And if there were things that got me there, then there were things that could help me get out of it. It changed it for me, and I was able to climb out. The spaces here are my favorite ones. My sweet Brixton was born in August of 2018, and for the first time in a long while, I got to breathe. I was no longer running a race of trying to get pregnant or stay pregnant. I could love on my 2 sweet kids, and I really enjoyed them for about 2.5 years. Life was really good, and I was really thriving. We still wanted to add a 3rd baby, and thought it would be so easy now that I knew the right Clomid dose. I knew that I needed progesterone shots in order to carry a baby to term. So getting this next baby here would be a breeze. This was in the early fall of 2020, and now it's 2023. And no 3rd baby. This next shoot feels like it's lasted almost 2.5 years, but we'll break it up into a few different ones. We knew at this point that Clomid was the trick, and we knew the right dosage, right? Wrong. We did 5 rounds of it, and right before I went to the pharmacy to pick up the 6th round, my doctor called to tell us that he'd called in the next higher, which just so happens to be the highest dose. We weren't even sure we were going to do that 6th round, but this felt like a miracle and one that we couldn't pass up trying. And sure enough, we found out that I was pregnant that cycle. Considering my last pregnancy had been successful, and the doctors had felt like my loss with Jet was a fluke, I was not expecting the depression to come back, but come back it did. I laid in my bed and didn't open my blinds for weeks. I was sick, and let that be my excuse to get out of everything. And then to add to this depression, we found out that Derek's first air traffic control placement outside of the military would be extremely remote. In April of 2021, we moved to the south rim of the Grand Canyon National Park, 1.5 hours away from the grocery store, 1.5 hours away from the doctors. I would need to homeschool, and I was moving away from family and friends, and a vast majority of my support network. I couldn't help move or unpack, and again, I laid in my bed with blinds closed for days. Derek was not set to report for a few weeks, and I needed my 16-week checkup, and insurance hadn't switched over yet. So we drove back to Utah to wait those weeks out at my mom's. Ellie had been really sad to leave her friends, so I set up a play date after my 16-week appointment. I thought, how fun for her to be able to see baby sis on the ultrasound and then play with her friend after. Best mom ever. However, after the doctor hyped Elia about seeing her baby sis and turned off the light and put the wand on my belly, there was no movement. The next few seconds felt like decades, and all I could hear him say was, I'm so sorry. I'm just so sorry. I didn't know what to do other than to call Derek and tell him over FaceTime. My sweet Ellie sat there confused as I sobbed on the phone while the doctor just kept repeating, I'm so sorry. I had to explain to my sweet 5-year-old that her little sister Lily had gone to heaven to be with Jesus, all in the same moment that my own heart was shuddering. We had to be seen early the next week to confirm the loss and to talk about our options. Those days in between finding out and my D&E were some of the most excruciating days. I remember trying my best to keep on a brave face all day, and then sobbing in the shower each night until every inch of my head hurt. The spaces here felt very much like my first miscarriage, where I binge watched a show for weeks straight, and this time it was Downton Abbey. This time felt different though. I was allowing myself to rest and recover, to turn off all the input coming from my phone, to turn off my brain and just be. I wasn't trying to block out reality, and that shift was so healing for me. Thinking about this ladder always makes me cry. Climbing back from the loss of my sweet baby girl is when everything began to change for me. The first rung to climbing out of this darkness was seeing Aubrey post about her antidepressant and allowing that to be my permission to start on an antidepressant too. I called the doctor that day, was seen virtually the next day, and I started on Zoloft that afternoon, and it changed my life. I hadn't realized how long I had been drowning in the dark until my Zoloft finally helped me to start seeing some light again. It was a tiny step up, but it felt huge, and it has lifted me higher than most anything else. Another rung on this ladder came from my desperation to feel God close again. I had remembered feeling him so close after we lost Jet, and I craved that again. I found that one of my favorite things after the losses of my babies is how close God feels. There's no other time in my life that I felt him that near, and it becomes such a sacred time for me. But I craved this again, and began to create time with him every single day. I found a prayer journal that changed my life and changed the way that I approach God in prayer. This journal included meditations, and I'd never really meditated before. But I decided to try it, and it became my absolute favorite part of my day. I created what I like to call my spiritual practice. I'd start out with a meditation to be still, and then I'd use my scriptures, Bible study guides, church talks, and so many others to know that I am God. And he always found me there. And I've received the most profound answers and the calmest sense of peace in those hours I spent with him. It was also in this time that I found Aubrey's detox program, where God nudged me to jump into it, and I followed it. And he aligned the stars just right to where I couldn't deny that joining her detox program was exactly what I needed to do. This program taught me even more about meditation, but also changed my life in even more profound ways. I joined the Anya program immediately after, and this gave me a group of women that I could chat with who knew what I was going through, who helped me through so much, and who helped fill all the lonely spaces of living in such a remote place. Another rung on this ladder was making the decision to do everything I could in this situation. There's so much of life that I cannot control, and that really felt thrown in my face. started to do a ton of research, which at times made me feel like a crazy person. But I began to take control of my health and our home environment. I researched so many different things, from the best products to be using to all the things that can cause second trimester losses. I had a list of tests I wanted done, and instead of being discouraged when a doctor would tell me no, I found a way to have them run myself. I was taking charge and taking my power back, and that felt like many big jumps on the ladder. The spaces here felt like big moves forward. We finally had gotten some answers that felt like very solid leads to our losses. We started a new fertility medicine called letrozole instead of Clomid, and we got pregnant again about 8 months after we lost our Lily. We were certain this baby would stick. When I think of this next shoot, the only word that comes to mind is alone. So much of this felt like it was done without anyone else. This pregnancy was another one that had me so sick. And on top of it, I was eating gluten-free, hoping that that would be the fix that would help us keep our baby. And the depression hit hard, again. There were weeks where I wasn't functioning, I wasn't able to homeschool well, and I wasn't able to get out of bed. But around 15 weeks, I started to feel good. And I was able to eat and get out of the house and play with my kids again. And I was so excited that things were looking up sooner than they usually do in my pregnancies. And just a few days later, it all came crashing down. Living in the canyon, we lived 1.5 hours away from the doctor's office, which was in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is right off the Navajo reservation. Because this tribe had been hit so hard, the COVID rules were still pretty strict in Flagstaff as of March 2022. I went into my 16-week appointment alone and found out alone that our sweet baby's heart had stopped beating. I couldn't even call Derek to tell him. I couldn't get the words out. I texted him the coldest, "There's no heart," and gave him little updates like checking on the bigger ultrasound and discussing next steps. Our sweet baby Finn was gone, and I was just trying to hold myself together. Finally, after what felt like hours, I was able to leave the doctor's office. I walked out of the doors, and the first thing I saw was Derek jumping out of the car and running to me as fast as he could. We met in the middle of the street, and my knees buckled. He dropped to the ground with me, and we both just sobbed. Now I can't see my car. The next 10 days might have been the darkest of my entire life. I had to wait 10 days for my surgery, and those days in between were hard. You can't move forward and you're stuck. You can't work on healing because you'll have to begin after surgery. It's a special moment. My mom came to be with us and help out with the kids, and she and I spent a lot of time discussing whether or not I needed to check into an inpatient facility. I hurt so much, and I couldn't really see the point in life. Finally, the day of my surgery came, and I was told that Derek couldn't be in pre-op with me, which was hard. He handles all of the paperwork and all of the arrangements with our mortuary, and I had to do all of that and go under all by myself. Then to top it all off, my COVID test came back positive after I'd already been prepped for surgery, and this changed everything. I could no longer be put under, and instead would have a spinal block and sedation. I had to be in complete PPE and be wheeled into a COVID bubble around the OR, and I felt like an alien. I had to hug a random stranger, also dressed in PPE, while I got my spinal block. I had been promised at the beginning of the day that I'd see Derek in post-op, which I had been picturing all morning to help me get through the surgery. But because of this positive COVID test, I had to stay in the OR, all by myself with one nurse the whole time. I didn't see Derek for 8 hours and only saw him again when they helped me into the car on the curb. This is the most alone and lonely I've ever felt. In these spaces, I desperately wondered what I was missing. Why was I getting this trial over and over again? What was I not learning? Each time it made me have to do it again. deep, dark pit to get out of. The first rung on this ladder was one that, looking back, seemed so silly, but I was really proud of myself that day. I opened my blinds. It was the first step to letting the light back in, even if it was just physical at that point and not yet mental light. The next step on this ladder was taking the time to ask God the questions I had had in the spaces. What was I missing? What was I not learning? And I got the sweetest answer that has since left me with so much peace. He told me that it was not what I was missing, it's what I already had. I have an incredibly supporting and loving husband. I have 2 very sweet kids. I have a mom that will drop anything for me to be there. And I have a testimony. I have the ability to get back up from this. I wasn't told why I have to go through this, but I was told that it's not my fault. It's not a punishment, and I'm not blind to the lesson. They say healing isn't linear, and I 100% stand by that. So this rung I'm about to share with you didn't happen right after this loss. In fact, it happened just last week. I've been working with a therapist doing EMDR. EMDR is a therapy modality where the therapist has you move your eyes, and that helps you to desensitize your trauma and to reprocess it. Sounds a little weird, and it is, but I've seen it work in the most beautiful way. At one point, I was telling my therapist that I was so alone in this loss. I found out alone, I made all the decisions alone, I was alone in the darkness, I was alone in the hospital. I did this little arm movement that my eyes follow, which she does after every statement, like the I was alone one. And as I watched his hands, my eyes welled with tears, and this overwhelming feeling came over me. I was numb. God was with me the whole time, even if I couldn't see him. And Derek may not have been right there with me, but he was as close as anybody would let him be. He was out in the parking lot, available by phone every second. And I had an army of prayers and people thinking of me. I was not alone, and this realization has been so healing for me, even a year later. The last rung I'll share for this ladder is one that I think will continue to be many rungs on many different ladders. I started my Instagram account called Hey Jenessa to spread light and hope amidst my losses. And it has been such a beautiful thing for me to share with so many other women. I follow a ton of baby loss accounts, and so many of them seem so stuck in this is my life now, this horrible grief. And I wanted to be a voice that it doesn't have to stay that way. You can and you will and you should find the light again. The spaces here looked like a lot more research and meeting with a few different doctors. We came up with a great plan to move forward, and I scheduled a few biopsies and an MRI to see if we could get any more answers. And by some miracle, a week after I scheduled all of those appointments, I had to call them back to cancel because I very unexpectedly found out that I was pregnant again, and we were not ready. My body was not ready, and my heart was definitely not ready. It had only been 6 weeks since our last loss, and I was not ready to do it again. That this baby was coming, whether we were ready or not, and that alone felt like a miracle. We were so hopeful that the miracle of getting pregnant like this would also mean we'd get our miracle rainbow baby too. In the first few weeks of this new pregnancy, we realized we needed better access to healthcare. We began putting together a package to ask the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, who Derek works for, to move us. And it was quickly approved with the news that we'd be moving to Boise. I spent several weeks in Utah being seen by a fertility center, and then transferred up to Boise when we moved. We had really great proactive doctors. I had an ultrasound every single week, and everything was looking perfect. I gave myself shots twice a day, took a steroid and a million other medications, and we were doing the thing. Not without some depression, but I honestly was doing so well. The next shoot starts here, when I was doing so well, and then I wasn't. The kids and I moved to Boise in July to be able to get them enrolled in school and settled in. Derek wasn't able to leave the canyon until the middle of September, and we didn't want to have to enroll them in school late. So while he was still in the canyon, I went into my 16-week ultrasound with my maternal fetal medicine doctor. I just had an ultrasound a week prior where everything had looked perfect, but my mind wasn't being kind that morning. I kept thinking through the text I would send my friend Kelsey, who was watching Brixton, and how I would have to tell her that I'd be way late to pick him up because there was no heartbeat. I had zero hope that my baby was still growing, and I told my ultrasound tech that when she asked how I was doing. And minutes later, I had to send that text to Kelsey.
Do you know what baby is?
Because our baby Red no longer had a heartbeat.
Do you know what baby is?
Even though my mind had prepared me, you really never can be prepared to hear those words. I went numb. I remember being asked rapid-fire questions about what happened the last few times and what I'd like the next steps to be, and I can only remember staring at them. I have no clue what words came out of my mouth. How could this be happening again? I began to seriously question everything. Why was I given this miracle baby to have it taken away? Did I not pray hard enough or correctly? Did I jinx it with my prayers in some way? I began to way overanalyze how I prayed, and I began to be angry. I didn't want to believe in a God that would continuously allow me to lose something my heart wanted so much, and that I had worked so hard for. I didn't want to believe in a God that would take all of my babies away. In these spaces, I allowed myself to be angry at God. All the other times, I tried to find all the good things and blessings and positives that helped then, not happening now. And after feeling a lot of guilt that being angry at God meant I didn't have faith, I realized it actually is a sign of faith. How could I be angry at someone that I didn't believe in? How could I be angry at him for not healing me if I didn't believe that he could heal me? Faith for me in this season looks like working through my anger with God. I've told him all about it, and as I've done so, he's slowly been able to chip away at my heart and to help me see some of the things that have come from this child. One of the rungs on the ladder to climb out of this loss was unexpected. I started to share some of the more personal details of second trimester losses on my Instagram account. The women that I've been able to connect with and the words they've said to me have lifted me more than I ever expected. I always debate whether or not to share after a loss and how much to share, but I've learned that sharing is always better. People can't lift you up if they don't know what you're going through. So we reached the present in my story, and I'm in the longest stretch of space I've ever given myself. After all of my other losses, I've been in a mad dash to find answers, staying up at all hours of the night researching, creating races and finish lines against myself, like needing to be pregnant before the previous due date. But I've let all of that go. I'm breathing deep, and I'm giving myself grace, and letting life unfold as God wants it to, and seeing that his picture for my life is really so beautiful. Life will happen as it's supposed to, and I know I'll be guided to the answers I need when they're supposed to come. I'm focusing on healing my body and healing my pain, and that makes these spaces actually feel like several rungs on a ladder. So how do I apply this to your life? Let's break down our chutes and ladders game again. I want you to think about the chutes in your life. Are you in one right now? Chutes sure can feel like the end of the world, but I promise that they're not. There is always a ladder coming after, I promise. Your chute may feel so big that you can't climb out of it, and that might actually be true. You may need a few ladders and a few spaces to climb your way back up to where you were. But man, it's always there's also so much beauty in the spaces. The spaces are so important. On a Chutes and Ladders game board, there is never a beginning of a ladder directly next to the bottom of a chute. And it's the same with life. The spaces in between the chutes and the ladders are critical. You cannot immediately start climbing at the bottom of your chute. You need space to breathe. You need space to feel. You need space to recuperate, to process, to pray, and to gain perspective. It may feel like you're stuck, but if you look at that game board again, it is still forward movement. And I promise if you give yourself this space without guilt, your climb will be much more easier and much more beautiful. The climb, the ladders. That's why we're here, right? To arise, to learn how to come to the light, to climb out of the darkness. The ladders in my life the last few years have put so much beauty into my life. One thing I wanted to emphasize about these ladders is that the rungs are not evenly spaced. Some of these rungs feel like massive leaps of faith. Other rungs may look like you've barely moved, but it's still upward movement, especially if that is all that you can do, like opening my blinds, for example. So don't expect your steps up to be evenly spaced. And the tiny steps add up to be bigger ones. So make sure you're doing those little things every day that move you upward. If you're needing a little help moving up your ladder, might I suggest making time every day to meet with God. Pray, read, be still, and listen to Him. He will show up for you and help you see clearly the next step, whether it's a run or taking a step into the next space. Take time to meditate and learn how to get out of your head. Your head can be a crazy place when you're flying down a chute. Meditation can help clear your head and give you peace when nothing else around you feels peaceful. And the number one thing that has helped me to arise time and time again is my perspective. Sometimes all it takes to go from a dark pit to the bright top of a ladder is a shift in your perspective. What if your situation could be easier? What if it didn't have to feel like God was punishing you? What if instead of feeling like He abandoned you, you looked for His hand in your situation? These shifts in perspective will change everything for you. And the last perspective shift that I've had is the one that I want to end on. I'm really grateful for the things I've shared through our baby loss journey on Instagram, because it's really neat to go back and look at how far I've come. And a few times over the years, mostly on Jet's birthday, I share a picture of me holding the balloon I had signed right before I sent it off to heaven for him at his graveside service. And each time I've shared, it's been a little letter to that girl about how far she's come. But this year, as I've been sharing my story more on Instagram, I've been going back through all of our pictures, and I was caught up on one from our Disneyland trip. My cute little belly was accompanied by my mom, my sister, Ellie, and her favorite princess, Princess Sophia. She was in heaven that day, and you could see on my face that I was too. The innocence on my face in that picture, it hit me so hard. And I thought about what letter I would write to her. Because man, some days I really miss her. Would I warn her about all of the hard things that were going to happen in just a few days? And I tell her that that wouldn't be the last time, or even the second to last time? I don't think so. If I only had one page to write to her, I'd tell her about how strong she becomes. I'd tell her about the empathy she gains. I'd tell her about the impact that she's making. I'd tell her about the confidence that she exudes. I'd tell her about how intensely she'll feel joy. I'd tell her about how beautiful her story is going to be. And it's not beautiful because it's easy. And I'd tell her, that she has everything she needs to get through it. I'd tell her, just as I'd like to tell you right now, was so much